Hi. So when somebody mentioned this issue that I'm going to bring up to you, I felt like there are so many things I'm trying to deal with when I'm teaching, and so many things within my own work that I'm trying to think about. And I had this moment of internal groan. I have to take on this responsibility to deal with this big issue. So I thought, well, better place to bring it up than to you. And so you can take on that responsibility and consider it too. So thank you very much. It's really exciting to be here, and I've just really enjoyed the talks. They're just so diverse and really exciting. So I want to bring up this issue that I've been thinking about. We all know it's important for you or students to explore materials and processes and grow to understand what sculpture is in the field of sculpture. Without it, we cripple the learning and understanding. That said, over the last few years, I began to ask myself, what role should sculpture play in a world that's fragile, shrinking natural resources, global economies, and new media dominance? I'm sure many of you share this scenario with me. We have a challenging quarter. We're on the 10-week system, so it goes by really fast. And students explore contemporary sculpture conceptually, technically. Classes are over, and this is what we end up with. So studio space becomes a dumping ground. Our technical staff, we call them SRAs, can't even deal with the surfeit of leftover sculpture, even though we say, take it away, lose your grades, etc. And basically, they resort to ordering a skip and hauling it away. And this is where most of our sculpture ends up. So straight to the landfill. So what seems to be missing from our classroom conversations is an approach that addresses not only the life cycle of object making and creating, but also the changes that have impacted our world in the last 10 years. Not just the depletion of natural resources, but also the way our relationship to real and virtual space, to objects, has dramatically shifted. I've been teaching at UC Santa Cruz for 10 years, but when I first started teaching, I really, the relationship we had to the objects, the computer, the cell phone is just so different. It's stunning to think about. So this is a piece, I'm sure some of you know it, by Simon Starling, but I love the idea of it, and I think it suggests the metaphor of the way we're teaching in schools, which is we're actually using the materials to kind of deplete the thing that we're driving on. So I thought it's kind of perfect. So by sticking to the same old techniques and concepts, and we're really pushing in terms of conceptually, but at some point we all go back to like, do we teach some fundamentals to students? I want to have you know how to work in a wood shop, so you can have that as part of your, I always call it the smorgasbord toolkit, Taste this, okay, stop doing that. Weld this, all right, now you know that. Do this, let's cast this. But in some ways, are we shortchanging our students conceptually and materially? Are we leaving ourselves and them unprepared for a world in which the relationship to objects, both physical and virtual, shifts daily? One in which our natural resources are being depleted at an alarming rate? Are we providing a closed system, an airless corridor? And what is the future of object making, consuming and creating and producing sculpture? What stuff should we be teaching in all good conscience? This is an image of 28,800 bath toys that were lost at sea. They were dumped on a shipping container. And apparently there's whole areas, aside from things we're throwing away, but whole areas that just kind of fall off container ships that are floating around in our oceans at this point. So some of the students at UC Santa Cruz use natural materials, landfill scrounged objects, free-cycled materials as a way to address the manufacture and consumption. But mostly our dialogues around this are reserved for specific conversations about conservation and recycling, rather than a departmental policy or perspective. And I have to say, my mind was a little bit blown. I founded a social practice research center at UC Santa Cruz, and we invite artists to come and be artist fellows and work on research projects with us. And we invited a woman, Barbara Benish. She's originally from the US, but she's actually just came from the Czech Republic. And she's doing a project which is basically about SS Palo Alto. It's a cement ship that's off the coast of Santa Cruz, and it's actually become this natural barrier reef. And at that same time, there are amazing amounts of ocean life that have come there, and near to that, just a little farther out, is the biggest garbage patch. And so she said, why don't we create a site there that's basically going to be a project working with marine biologists, other kinds of scientists, environmental scientists, and artists to create an art park. And she came up with the idea and suggested she would do it for a residency with us. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Good idea. Sounds good. Come back. Why don't we start small? You can do a small thing, kind of work with a few students, some ideas. And she came back and said, well, the UN Safe Planet campaign is interested in having a collaboration. Would the research center be interested in having a connection? And I was like, all right, so we have the Safe Planet campaign that's apparently trying to look for ways to communicate some of these ideas about what's happening in our oceans. And they're all of a sudden looking to artists to see whether they could communicate these ideas. So I took one of my classes and said, well, why don't we just start with projects with students? And I have to say that it has shifted my relationship to object making simply through that and brought me to think about considering these dialogues with you. So these are just all images from my students. So this brings me to the Spanish Pavilion, the Venice Biennale. And so contemporary sculpture, these days, we've got several kind of paths going on, but the realm of spectacle has really kind of re-emerged in recent times. And this year, in the Venice Biennale, Lara Almasegui, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know the pronunciation of these people's names very well, have been working on the boundary between urban regeneration and decay. Her exhibition, Constructed Materials, renders visible what escapes our attention, revealing, and this is according to the press release, the connections that inform us about the relationship between our past and our future. This is one of the two sites of her work. The second's an empty plot of land beside the island of Murano. The materials of the Spanish Pavilion are mounds of construction materials, the same type and quantity used by workers to construct the building in the earlier 20th century. There's huge amounts of cement rubble, roofing tiles, and smashed bricks. Other rooms contain sawdust, glass, iron, slag, and ashes. The second site is Santa Matia, an artificial island formed by the waste deposits of Murano's glass-making industry. And I was just wondering what will happen to this debris when the exhibition ends. Will this work be collectible? I'm sure you've all heard of Al Gore's statement, the majority of scientists are right, then we've got just 10 years left to alter our consumption habits. If we don't change them, we may engender weather, floods, heat waves, and epic droughts. So on that hand, and on the other hand, we have somebody who's creating this work that probably will go into a collection somewhere and kind of recirculate in this whole other kind of commodified market of sculpture. And I just find myself kind of caught between these two things, and then standing in front of a Sculpture 1 class I'm teaching this quarter and going back to on Monday, wondering what my role and responsibility is in these questions. So experiments in additive manufacturing, 3D printing, it's this whole new way of thinking. For those of you who don't know about that, this possibility you could create a CAD drawing and then have it printed out could allow students to explore sculptural form and reduce the punishment of material use. And that's actually a direct quote from my tech, who I said, hey, do you have any images? And he kind of got into this dialogue with me, and we had this whole conversation about the use of things and too much stuff. So Brian Kwan told me that some 3D printers are exploring the option to chip scrap prints and take them back, and so they could remate into the feed supply for the prints. But then, of course, energy plays an interesting role in that conversation, too. It's not as if you're not using resources. So how can we engage the publics, communicate options beyond the classroom, but also within the classroom that really address some of these issues that feel to me like kind of the guilty responsibility? And I feel like I'm the kind of bad taste after lunch, so sorry. You all threw away your Styrofoam cups and plates and came to this issue. So I have no answers to this question. There were a couple of things as I was looking around and with the projects that I've been dealing with myself with students that I wanted to sort of bring it in. And I thought this was an interesting one. This is a bat tower. It's Joyce Huang's Bat Tower. And I like this idea as the idea that you could model a sculpture that addresses and explores conservation and environmental impact, but could also function as a teaching tool for learning techniques, which really could be a starting point for a thought. So literally you have a project that's supposed to be raising awareness and also a place that bats could be in, but it starts having these conversations in really different ways than making a sculpture that's a complete assignment that's aside from some of these issues. And similarly, some of you might know this work, but the life casts that Jason DeCaris-Taylor does, where basically they're made from materials that he puts back in the oceans, and these become artificial reefs. And people are coming to see this as a tourist attractions, because one major thing that's impacting the as well as all the other acidification, et cetera, that's happening with the oceans, is the fact that tourists are damaging the reefs by coming to visit them. So people are actually coming to this reef as an alternative option. But this could teach casting. These are these really different and interesting considerations. I'm also inspired by the temporality of Alaron and Calzadera's work, and so this landmark piece, Vieques, Puerto Rico, which is dealing really with issues of a place or a site where the army had taken over that site, and then native people were not allowed to use whole sections of it. And so creating something which is, I guess, temporal qualities that suggest the fragility of some of these environments. I'm also aware that there had to be shoes made that made these prints, etc. So, it doesn't end, it's just these considerations. And so perhaps a place to start a conversation is at the Angola Pavilion, which won the Golden Lion this year, back to the Venice Biennale. And for Edison Chagas, his photographs concentrate on the systematic cataloging of abandoned objects, repositioned within urban spaces. And the intention, again according to the press release, is to provide context, to create new relationships between the objects and their context, the form and its codification. And I wonder how to create spaces in the classroom to bring us closer to the crisis in real-time space, virtual spaces, and question our responsibilities in the fabrication of objects. What role should imagination and creativity play in this dialogue?